MPO webinar. My name is Giles Inman, and I'm the Business Development Manager for MPO. MPO, for those that aren't members of our organisation, is the leading residential landlord association for the East Midlands area. Our key benefits include possessing strong relationships with local councils and possessing excellent local knowledge, which is a must for any residential landlord wanting to successfully manage property across this region. Today's webinar is
Giles, unmute yourself, mate.
Oh dear.
Sorry, Giles.
Sorry, I thought you'd unmuted me, Adela.
I tried, yeah, sorry.
Okay, start again. Welcome, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for this MPO webinar. My name is Giles Inman, and I'm the Business Development Manager for MPO. MPO is the leading residential landlord association for the East Midlands area. Our key benefits include possessing strong relationships with local councils and possessing excellent local knowledge, which is a must for any residential landlord wanting to successfully manage property across the region. Today's webinar is a chance for David Hobbs and Aaron Hennessy for Nottingham City Council licensing team to answer landlord questions relating to the HMO and selective licensing schemes operating in Nottingham. We have a list of questions submitted by attendees to this webinar, and my colleague Adela will ask David and Aaron in the Q&A part of this webinar these questions. We anticipate further questions throughout the webinar and encourage delegates to type them into the chat box where Adela and I will ask them on your behalf. Before we start with the Q&As, David and Aaron will be giving a short, brief update on the 3 licensing schemes, including how COVID-19 has impacted the schemes. Before I hand over to David and Aaron, please can you mute your microphones and video so we can keep background noise to a complete minimum. And please note this webinar will be recorded for future viewings. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to David and Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giles, and thank you all for allowing Aaron and myself to present this afternoon. I will just briefly talk about the selective licensing in terms of our current performance. And then Aaron will touch on some of the HMO work that Aaron works around the HMO licensing side of things. So just to give you a brief update on some of the key stats, really, I suspect some of you are interested in. In terms of applications received, to date, we've received over 21,000 applications for selective licensing. And we've issued over nearly 18,000 draft licenses. And we've issued 8,300 final licenses for the scheme. The drafts, we expect all of those draft licenses to be done by the end of August, possibly in September. And the finals we're aiming to issue in the autumn, to have all those issued. So that a lot of the officers that are currently working on issuing the draft licenses will then move across, and that's already starting, actually moving across to issue the final licenses. In terms of COVID, our work has continued. We are all, about 90% of us, actually working from home. So we're continuing to issue documents, which hopefully a lot of you will have received over the last 4 months, and continue to work through the draft and final licensing. The work that has ceased and sort of almost paused is the compliance work that was planned to start early this year, around April. But what we have started doing recently is some trialing, some external inspections, and some self-assessment forms for landlords. So we've done, that only started a couple of weeks ago, going out external property inspections for licensed properties, and then getting in touch with the landlords directly to talk through some of those issues with them. Before lockdown, we had done some pre-licensing inspections, and that was, we did nearly 500 pre-licensing inspections where there were particular concerns about the property, issues raised on the application form that warranted further verification, further assessment, really, before we issued the documents. We've moved away from that now to try and focus on getting the licenses issued, and then we will do stronger compliance. And to answer one of the later questions now, we expect compliance work to start more meaningfully in terms of going into properties in the autumn, we've got a sort of reinstatement process at the council around services that have been suspended, and it's got to go through quite a rigorous process to check that our risk assessments are in place and that we've got appropriate procedures to properly deal with the inspections, and that will apply across Aaron's work around HMOs as well. So that's a very, very quick summary of some of the key performance statistics that I think a lot of you will be interested in, and what we've been doing for the last few months. So I'll hand over to Aaron. Thank you. Does Aaron need to unpause or unmute? Just unmute yourself, Aaron. Can you do that, Adila, for him?
I'm trying to. Aaron, you need to unmute yourself. Hold on. Let's see. Is that? It's not letting me.
Is that me now?
Oh,
I think
yeah,
that's
perfect. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Yes, so a similar situation that we have in HMO licensing team. We're currently all working from home and everybody is working incredibly hard. We've had the best performance ever in terms of licensing output. Last month in June, we had a total of 114 HMO licenses issued, which is excellent work by the staff. HMO licenses are a little bit more complicated because we have to do a lot of assessment of facilities and amenities for the correct number of occupants in the HMO. Thank you so much to all license holders and landlords who have agreed to electronic service. Again, that means that our work is that little bit easier working from home because we don't have access to printing and postage services. So that's made the work a lot easier and ensured that we are performing at top level. As David said, we've paused our current pre-licensing inspections and also compliance momentarily. But we are getting ready soon and working hard behind the scenes to put in processes that will be able staff to restart that process safely as well for HMO occupants, landlords and staff themselves. I've recently been involved in the Nottingham Resilience Forum. That is a consortium of council officials, the NHS, Public Health England, and that's where we're discussing the transition from the government being the lead on the COVID-19 outbreak to more local administration. For example, if there's a local outbreak, and HMOs being identified as a key part of that, and HMO landlords as well, in the part that they play in, for example, like track and trace, where occupants may not necessarily know the details, the contact details of their flatmates and housemates, and how landlords such as yourselves will play a key part in helping us control that. And obviously there will be support as well and guidance from the council if it is identified that one of your tenants do come down with COVID-19. Antisocial behavior has been a big agenda item recently. As you can imagine, there are heightened sensitivities amongst the local communities with regards to COVID-19, especially with students returning to the city. I know that both universities are very keen that they have as near normal number of students returning to the city. And we're working hard with them as well and local residents and landlords to address those concerns around COVID-19. In relation to ASB, there's been new ASB that hasn't previously been reported to us, and we think that a lot of that is, for example, people working from home where they haven't heard those noises or sounds before, and it's new, and yet that activity by the neighbors was always there. It's not something new. So we're working hard on that, and as well our ASB process. We've revised it so we believe is a lot more balanced. Previously, when we received ASB complaints, they were kind of treated almost cumulatively, which wasn't necessarily fair on license holders and landlords. So where we do receive a complaint now, we are ensuring that that person who is being antisocial, that they are attributed to that conduct and not necessarily the house. So if, for example, there's a turnover of tenure, that's reflected as well in our approach, and that it's a lot better and more fair system. And that's what we're doing in HMO land. I could probably hand back to David, and we'll start answering some of your questions that you sent in to us.
Yeah, right. So we've got quite a lot of questions. We've split them into two sections, one selective licensing and the other is the HMO licensing, and then just some general questions. Just before we start, there's just one that's come up. Can you confirm if Clifton Estate is covered in mandatory licensing if there are 4 tenants in a property?
I'm pretty certain it's not, but what I will do is, because mandatory licensing is 5 or more people as a starter, so 4 people is just additional licensing. I don't think the additional licensing area stretches down to Clifton, but what I will put in the chat box is a link to our website where you can search by address and postcode, and it will show you all the 3 schemes and whether or not the property is within the area. So that's called My Property, which is on the council's website. And that's a really useful tool, actually, for identifying properties, see whether or not they're in these scheme areas.
Okay, I think, David, you've answered the question regarding inspections beginning under selective licensing. What triggers a selective license inspection? Clearly, the council are unable to inspect all properties.
Yeah, so in terms of the reasons for us going through the inspections, and it does, again, this covers some of the other questions that are going to come up. The reinstatement process is quite a lengthy process, but as I say, hopefully we'll be back out in the autumn. The reasons for us to inspect is around the scheme priorities. So some of that is around property conditions. So the big area that we want to improve in particular is low performing energy performance certificate data. So we've got all that data from applications that we've been receiving. So in particular, F&G rated properties are highly likely to get an inspection. Properties where there are in higher than expected crime areas, perhaps where there's no training records that landlords have not provided, where there's fire safety concerns that we've identified through the application form, that when landlords have filled the application form in. Overseas landlords, again, that's another one of our criteria that we'll be using to inspect. And I think the number of stories of a property as well was some of the criteria that we put in the application form to help us prioritise the inspections at compliance stage. And also we'll have our own records that we'll be looking at in terms of previous complaints, history of non-compliance to perhaps other licensing schemes. If landlords have got HMOs, they've got a track record of poor engagement. If we prosecuted somebody or had to serve notice, then that's sort of part of the criteria we'll be using. In terms of the overseas landlords, there's an additional risk assessment process that we go through, and so a landlord can apply to be an overseas landlord. No guarantee they will be, but there's a further stage of questions around how their property is managed. I haven't got the details to me, but if landlords are based overseas, they can apply for a license, but there's no guarantee that they will get one. There's sort of other checks and balances that we have to put in place before we would consider that. Also, we have we're not going to inspect all properties. The criteria that we set as part of the licensing scheme was that we would anticipate to inspect a minimum of 50% of non-accredited properties and 10% of accredited properties. And that was, we've done that very, very transparently through the whole process, right from the start, through executive board at the council, recognising that it is a significant number of properties, over 21,000. So also, and all part of the block licenses, we now allow landlords to apply for a block licence. They will also get inspected as well, and they will get inspected at least twice during the duration of the licence. Recognising that a lot of those properties are higher risk in terms of number of occupants within the properties. So that's some of the criteria that we'll be using.
Right, thank you. How many inspections does a property receive during the licence period? In Gedling and Ashfield, my properties have been inspected twice under selective licensing. In Nottingham, I'm still waiting for my license and notification of inspection.
Yeah, so in terms of, I think I've answered that in terms of 50, you may not get an inspection at all during the 5-year period, because we're prioritising the higher risk properties through the criteria that I've just talked about. However, we will be doing some desktop work, as in we may do some external inspections of properties, but maybe not go into the property. But we may also ask for you to send in copies of your training certificates, of your ASB plan, of your renewed gas certificate, electrical safety certificate, which is a requirement under different legislation as of now if you've got new tenants, but also next year if you've got current tenants within the property. Electrical safety regulations have changed. That's already been in place for HMOs for a long time, but that's just to recognise that even in the last few months, things, as we all know, continue to change. So yeah, we are not Gedling, we're not Ashfield, we are a different scheme to those councils, and we've chosen to go a different path with our work. But I'm hoping that we'll get to a lot of those properties minimally we'll get to a lot of them just through doing some paperwork, checks and balances, and perhaps where those landlords don't provide the certificates, or they're out of date, or they're showing that the electrical safety is inadequate at a property or dangerous, then we will want to go and inspect some of those properties. So where you may not be identified initially as getting an inspection through some of the work that we do, then actually we may be out to come and inspect your properties.
Right, the next question, it's from Richard. If the majority of Nottingham City Council licensing staff are working from home, how is the council trying to trace those private landlords who have not made an application to date? What figures does Nottingham City Council have for the numbers that have been fined or traced?
I haven't got those figures to hand. We have prosecuted and served civil penalties on a number of landlords before lockdown. The courts have been suspended for a lot of cases unless they're significant priority over the last few months. So our work has been paused in a lot of those areas. But I don't have the exact figures, but I don't know what the figures are exactly, but I can find those out and share those with you after the meeting or in the next week or so to pull those out. We've got a whole, we used the Building Research Establishment, BRE, as part of our evidence base for selective licensing. So we have got a list of addresses of properties that are believed to be privately rented within the selective licensing area, which is where we get our figures from as part of the consultation and the exercise for the scheme. So we have got a list. Again, some of those properties may have been sold now, but we have got a list of properties where we can work to identify those still. And we're still receiving about 300 applications a month. That goes up and down, and also block licenses. Some blocks are being built still and likely to be occupied in the coming months, particularly with students coming back in September. So we're still receiving applications, and we know that some of the block license applications are due to be coming in over the next few months as well.
Right, does antisocial behaviour plan apply only for HMO, or does it apply for selective licensing?
Yeah, that's for selective as well. It will be in the conditions that you get at the draft license stage. We've got an example plan on our website that we've worked with landlords to develop, and it's user friendly. It gives you an idea of the types of issues you might get within a property and how to approach that, and also what we might expect in terms of what an ASB plan looks like, and what you as a landlord are expected to do, or a license holder, should problems arise at the property.
When conducting an inspection, will tenants be asked to move out due to COVID-19?
No, I think as long, and we have done some emergency inspections with appropriate PPE in place. You know, we have triaged our inspections when tenants complain to the council. We've continued that service, albeit in a far more limited role. So I don't believe there'll be a requirement for a tenant to move out. So obviously social distancing requirements. Social distancing requirements will still be in place, and so it might be a room by room. We we as officers may have to wear appropriate PPE when we're doing the inspections, and additional questions may be asked before we enter the building to, have you got any symptoms and that sort of thing. And if they are displaying symptoms, then as a risk assessment, the officers may then not do an inspection of that property. But that's part of the work that we're doing about reinstating services to make sure that the officers are kept safe as well.
What does how does block licensing work? We have 4 properties in the same building. Should we apply for a block license instead of individual?
Yeah, so this was signed off in November last year, almost as a following a review of a court case down in London that didn't get reported but was brought to our attention, where so we've got a whole policy, and it's available on our website. And again, I will dig the papers out, and there's information on our website about how you can apply if it's appropriate. It works in that you get a license for the block rather than for the individual units within the block. It's a different fee structure, so you pay a kind of a base fee, and then you pay an extra fee for each of the dwellings. So it doesn't always work out cheaper unless you've got more dwellings within the block. So that's for individuals to look at the policy and see whether it would apply or not. For 4 properties, it probably wouldn't work out any cheaper. It'd probably be more expensive to apply for a block license. You get more inspections, and there are more license conditions to comply with. So it's not always suitable for everybody where they have got dwellings within a block. But I'll share in the chat the link for that as well after I've finished.
All the full licenses I've received state that an inspection has been carried out on the property. I have contacted all the tenants and the Nottingham City Council licensing team, and no inspections have been carried out. Could I request that these letters are not sent out, as it causes confusion?
I'd like to see a copy of those letters, because if we've not inspected, I can't believe we would have told somebody we have inspected.
Maybe we can sort that out. If Richard contacts us, then we can. Yeah, we'll send that. Just another one, which one of our MPO members was not happy about the tone for a compliance letter. Basically, I think there was the pin of the bin of the lid was missing, and the letter was very, very aggressive. Why is that?
I'll ask Garen to talk about that when he talks about his HMO work later.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. Okay,
right.
Thanks.
The selective licence fee went up by £110 recently. Is there any plan to increase the fee again before the renewal of the scheme in August 2023? If so, can this be done with at least a 6-month notice period, therefore giving my tenants a heads up on expected timings for their rent increase?
So if a landlord's already got a license and they've already paid the fee, they won't have to pay any other fees unless they buy a house in the meantime. So there shouldn't be any rent increases for the tenants, is what I'd like to say on that, first of all, unless you do an annual rent increase anyway. So in terms of the fee, we've committed to reviewing the fee annually. So we reviewed it last year and likely again to review it this year, but that doesn't mean that it will go up. But we've said we will keep it under review. I can't guarantee giving 6 months notice period because once that gets signed off by councils, we would usually seek to implement it reasonably quickly. But if we are reviewing it, it would usually probably be around April time. It may be, depending on, we reviewed it. So it was April from this year. So again, it would be reviewed for April next year. So just watch this space, and I will be in touch with MPO and other landlord organisations should there be any changes to that.
Right. Why can the council not issue selective licenses for 5 years from the date of issuing the final licence? I applied for a licence in 2018. It was issued in 2020 with an expiry date in 2024. Surely the expiry date should be 2025. Yeah.
So I'm just going to read from a script here because we worked through this with our legal team. But the scheme started on the 1st of August 2018, nearly 2 years ago. And the length of time it takes to determine an application varies depending on the circumstances of that particular property or the application. And so for this reason, the council has determined that the period for which a license remains in force shall be determined from the date that an effective application was received rather than from the date that the license was granted. And that's really why. So it's really from the date that the application was received that we'd work the 5 years from.
Right. Can the council start publishing interim progress reports on the achievements, benefits and outcomes selective licensing has delivered to the private sector housing?
Yes. We did some presentations internally last year, but there was in the autumn, in October last year, we went to our overview and scrutiny committee at the council. So that is a public document, so I can share the link to that. And the last few months have been a bit hectic and have not been normal, shall we say. So we're a bit behind on some of the other sort of annual reports, but I can share the link to October's overview and scrutiny committee report that I did last year.
Right. Is there any scope within the regulations for the council to evaluate the scheme and remove areas or streets from the scheme that no longer meet the threshold, i.e. there's a reduction in antisocial behaviour?
A whole scheme can be revoked before the end of the 5-year period. There are no plans for the council to undertake that work. I mean, currently, in particular, antisocial behaviour, as Aaron's already hinted, has gone up massively, not just in HMOs. It's across the board. I think it's in private rented houses and obviously non-private rented houses. People are in the house longer, and more people are perhaps enjoying themselves more in their properties. So there's not any, as far as I'm aware, and I can keep checking that, but there's no requirement to revoke a scheme. Clearly, if this scheme massively swung and ASB was solved and there were no poor property conditions and crime had dropped through the floor, and deprivation had improved, then we could look at revoking the scheme. But all of the criteria, 5 years isn't actually a very long time to turn around significant issues affecting the private rented sector. So I don't envisage the scheme being sort of shrunk in the next 3 years before any other scheme may or may not happen in the future.
Okay. If I own one apartment in a block of flats, how do I go about licensing?
So you just have to apply for a license through the scheme. If you just own one flat or one apartment, then you'd be responsible for that, and you'd have to apply as it were a sort of a house. The block license, there's a policy around block licenses, and the block licenses usually apply where there's I think it's common management of the property. So one company is responsible for the management of that whole block, and I'll put it in the chat, the actual link to the policy, but it's not appropriate for everybody. But if you're a leaseholder in a block where everybody else is different leaseholders, you've got different people coming in to do repairs in your flat compared to the apartment next door. You've got different managing agents letting out the properties and managing the properties on your behalf. Then that is unlikely to fit, well, highly unlikely to fit within the block policy. So it would just be an individual license for that dwelling.
Okay. Can an application be put in at any time for free to amend a condition on a license to say after 3 or 4 years you still can apply to amend or remove a condition?
Not quite sure. Is that where a condition may have been complied with? The conditions are more about the management of the property, which is ongoing. So that's why licensing is quite different to part 1 of the housing. It's about improvements to the property. So generally conditions aren't taken off. However, if it's an HMO license and you're increasing the numbers of people within the property, then you'd have to apply for a variation to a license, and that's free. So you can vary the license online. You can put that, apply online for variation to a license, both for selective and HMO licensing. but that's often if you've changed your managing agent or you've moved house, that sort of thing. You need to just update us on some of those sort of personal details that would amend the license.
David, if you do change your managing agent, do you need to get a brand new license if they have the license?
No, that's just
if the license is in their name.
If the managing agent, yeah, if the managing agent is the license holder, that is a new license application. You can't vary the license holder, and we would strongly recommend when landlords apply for licenses, they seriously consider the relationship with the managing agent before they put them down as a license holder.
How can a selective license continue beyond the 31st of July 2023 if it is a 5-year designation?
The license is issued 5 years, so if the designation ends after 5 years, then the license, in theory, would carry on running. And that's happened with our HMO additional licensing scheme. There are some licenses that did carry on beyond the 5 years, and then when the scheme was renewed, in that case, those properties could then be re-inspected, could be checked for compliance under the new scheme. So there's no guarantees about what the future will hold, whether or not there'll be a further designation in the council area. So, but there may be, and if there is, then those properties could be re-inspected if the designation covered the same area.
Right. Are landlords expected to be carrying out 6 monthly inspections in the current climate?
What I've not talked about is the government introduced some guidance which not all landlords may be aware of around the private rented sector. It was aimed at landlords, tenants, and local government. So we recognise that there's got to be some flexibility in terms of what is expected of landlords. You know, clearly, for the first few months in particular, during COVID, getting into a property, getting a contractor to go into the property to do works was not always viable, was not always possible, never mind viable. So we recognise that there needs to be some flexibility around that. But I think the climate has changed, and even if you don't go into the property, you might want to inspect externally. You might want to have a conversation with the tenants at the property, maybe even just looking through into the hallway to just check that things are okay and there aren't any significant issues. Having a sort of a face-to-face conversation can be more valuable than talking over the phone with somebody or via email and that sort of thing. I don't know what managing agents are doing in the current climate in terms of their inspections, but usually they are contracted to do certain number or a reasonable number of inspections for landlords. So I don't know what that market is looking like at the moment for landlords in terms of their expectations.
We've held quite a few webinars about this, so we've covered it in detail, which we've got the recordings.
Okay.
And for MPO members, we've also got risk assessment documents, which we've had produced for us. So if anyone wants those, just contact myself or Giles.
Great.
You're glad to know we're on to HMO licensing now, Aaron. Right, so the licensing website is not good. I tried to pay my license fee several times using several cards. Finally, one worked. On payment, the system just stored or reverted to the council website. Is the council going to get these types of highly frustrating issues fixed? If so, will they let us know when the problems are sorted?
Yes, I'm sorry to hear of some of the technical difficulties that license holders have when applying. I know there have been some glitches in the system. What they could do is, if you are mid-application, if you're able to save it, and if you have the reference number, then we will be able to look into that, because there have been definitely examples of where applications have been submitted and they haven't come through in our system yet. So very, very, very small minority. And definitely reach out to us if you're having any problems, and we'll be able to look into it for you. And again, apologies in that situation.
Okay, great. I've experienced issues saving the HMO license form whilst working through it, around not being able to download files and not being able to verify files once they were downloaded. Can this be sorted?
Yes, again, I'm very sorry, and it maybe repeating myself a little bit as well. If you take your application, one thing that we have noted is that our online application form may not like Internet Explorer, that it really likes Google Chrome. So if you have a go with Google Chrome, we found that sometimes that works quite well.
Right. The council requires details of other interested parties on the HMO application. If these change during the licence term, who updates this information and what are the implications, if any, under GDPR?
The interested parties are just taken at the time of the application. So if that changes during the license term, then it would really be down to the license holder, I guess, or other interested parties to update new interested parties. It would be good practice, if you have a new freeholder, to let them know that I'm operating a HMO. But in terms that is, it's not something that the council would get involved in. Really, once we issue the license and we've notified the interested parties, we've done our part.
Last year, I sent off a variation of licence form to increase the number of occupants from 4 to 6 in my HMO to help offset the cost of licensing, as you can only put the rents up so far. Yet I have heard nothing from the council. My licence is coming up for renewal. Do I renew my licence and benefit a simpler application process, or do I go through the drawn-out process of completing a brand new application?
So I'm sorry for the delay in processing your variation application. If you reach out to either myself or the HMO inbox, I can definitely get that fast-tracked for you. There is a slight delay in the number of variation applications we're processing at the moment. By all means, reach out to me. It's obviously would make your life a lot more easier to just renew it at 6. So we'll get that variation done and then you can renew at 6. Fingers crossed. And obviously we would look into the other checks and balances that it is suitable for 6 persons.
Right. The Google Chrome reference is true. Would it not be worth Nottingham City Council putting a click-through link and reference to this online? Otherwise you can spend hours trying to sort it.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good idea. What I'll do is I'll reach out to the web team and maybe put a little icon where there's an info button that this application is best assessed and put through using Google Chrome. So I can definitely feed that back.
Right, Aaron, I'm not sure this one's for you or for David. What liaison is there between the council and Unipol? As over the years, we have had inspections by both. This seems to be unnecessary duplication.
Yeah, I definitely, we don't inspect all Unipol, but we do inspect some. So I think it's around 10% that we aim for. So you may have been in the 10% catchment, but again, we trust accredited landlords and those with Unipol that they've got good higher standards and that we don't actively put them in the same list for compliance inspections.
Right. Nottingham say they want to work with good landlords. So why is it the case that no discount is given on renewal applications, as is the case in Derby and many other areas? Other licensing authorities give a discount on renewal as the council's component cost for administration processing and the development element of the scheme will be less. So why is this saving not passed on to on as a discount in Nottingham?
I think what we found is that actually the vast majority, it must be around 95% of our applications now are renewals. So one way of looking at it is that we haven't passed on that extra expense to the 5% or so of new HMOs are created. Due to the Article 4 declaration, there's been a real flat line in the number of new HMOs coming on. There was a slight increase whenever the definition was removed by the government, removing the 3 stories. So in the outskirts of the city, outside additional licensing. But I'd say that that's the reason why is that because the vast majority are renewals. So that's why there is no renewal discount.
Right. Why has the council now changed PAT testing from a 2-year period to a 1-year period?
We definitely keep our license conditions under review, and my understanding was that there was some research done into that, and that was regarding, I think it was some guidance from the Health and Safety Executive around certain appliances that were in high use, and there was a recommendation that they were tested 12 monthly. I can double check that with you. My operations manager is on annual leave at the moment, but I'll definitely fish out the research and get sent off to Giles, and hopefully we'll be able to share it around.
Thank you. On a student HMO inspection for a renewal of a HMO license, we were told to make some major changes to the staircase as it was deemed a hazard to tenants. Presumably, the Parr versus Nottingham City Council case allows for the HMO licence holder to request a licence for students only, which in summary means some flexibility can be considered in terms of licensing conditions due to the age and style of tenant.
Yeah, so in that case, I'm presuming that the officer would have gone out and seen the stairs and done a HHSRS assessment. So they should have considered the current or likely occupancy, and I guess they deemed that the current occupants were at risk to the stairs. And part of a HHSRS assessment is we also take in, as I said, potential occupiers and also the visitors of the occupants, so perhaps parents or younger siblings perhaps may visit them. In terms of the Parr case, I think that case was related more towards the things that aren't a hazard, so amenity provision and suitability of the HMO, whereas HHSRS is more of a science, and that is an assessment of the likely harm outcome based on a lot of research and science behind it. So they're slightly different. If the landlord was concerned that that's that they're not happy with that course of action, then the officers generally deal with them informally first. So hopefully there is time for representations to be made if they think that a better course of action is more appropriate.
Okay, I've got some general questions now, so it'll be for either one of you. How will having a database of licensed landlords help tenants avoid rogue landlords when the database is not freely available or accessible?
The Theresa May, I think they're talking about the rogue landlord database, indicated that she wanted to make it available to the public. That database that we feed into is controlled by the Ministry of Housing, so we wouldn't have access on who's able to access that, but hopefully the government will stay true to their word and that access will be given to tenants.
Right.
So if I could just come in there,
Yeah.
Adela, I think that might also be, we have got a list of licensed landlords on our website as well, which we have to maintain as a public register. We've redacted that, so it hasn't got everybody's details on it. It's just got the property details and the expiry date and that sort of thing of the license. What we're trying to do is link that up with our My Property pages, so that anybody, including a managing agent taking on a new property, can identify whether or not that property that they're taking on has got an application with the council or is actually licensed. There's a bit of work and going on in the background to try and sort that out, but we're hoping so on the My Property you can search by individual properties, not just see whether it's in the designated area for a scheme, but see whether or not it's actually licensed or not as well. And then there's already our redacted list of licensed properties on our websites as well for HMOs and for selective licensing.
All right, thank you. This is a good one. Can the council provide calculations on how they arrived at their licensing fees so landlords can understand what they are paying for?
Yeah, as part of the executive board reports, there was a fairly detailed breakdown of the costs of the scheme when they were set up. So that's already detailed within the executive board reports. I can provide a more detailed breakdown of the fee that we provided following an FOI request last year, I believe it was, which I can share with you because that's it's been sent out as public information. So I can share that after the meeting, and that gives quite a detailed breakdown of the costs of the scheme over the 5 years.
Will you be able to send that to us, Dave, and then we can pass it on?
Yes, yeah, I'll do that.
I'm currently a DASH accredited landlord. I have noticed the licensing fees went up in April and the DASH discount net property has gone down from £300 to £220 at the same time. How does this blend in with the council's claim they want to work with good landlords?
Well, we still offer a discount for accredited landlords. What we recognised was that actually the discount was overly generous. It was taking us more time, unfortunately, to process accredited properties compared to non-accredited properties. So whilst there is still a discount, it has shrunk, but we have kept a discount in there. And as Linda has said, other councils don't actually provide any discount for their licensing scheme. So I like to think that we continue to work with landlords, and we've just gone through that process of review, and the reduction has taken place. But that's really just to make sure that the scheme can sustain itself throughout the 5 years.
Right. With antisocial behaviour, fly tipping and crime increasing in social housing areas, what measures is the council undertaking to deal with these issues?
Aaron, do you want to come in on that one? Or?
Yeah, like I said, I attend a ASB tasking meeting every Wednesday where we sit down with police colleagues and other partners and we go through a list of properties where there's been ASB reported. So we're working with our police, with Nottingham City Homes, with license holders to support them and taking reasonable practical steps to arrest that behaviour, and as well ensuring that tenants are held accountable for their conduct.
Right. Can you confirm whether I can provide an expired EPC certificate for a new licensing application? The tenant has been in occupation for a long time, and I note national legislation states an EPC is only required if I renew the tenancy once a tenant moves out.
Yes, is the short answer, particularly in COVID at the moment, without limited inspections. All I would say is that as soon as that tenant does move out, that you would need to make sure that you get a new EP certificate. If you're filling in a form, just put on the form that you know it's expired, but the tenant is currently living in the property and has done since it's expired, so that the officer going through that application understands that. So I would really recommend that it's just flagged for the officer, because otherwise it might end up coming back to you because it's expired. So make it clear. We don't know obviously when the tenant moved in and that sort of thing as part of the application process, so just flag that on the application form in the free text box on the last page of the application form. That really helps the officer.
Right. I'm the landlord for a few student HMOs in Lenton. Why is this the case? I'm treated as a non-resident and have to pay for a parking permit of £300 per year or £25 per day to visit my property before 5 p.m. Monday to Friday.
I think the bit about being non-resident is the key bit. The landlord isn't a resident. There's a different fee structure for residents and non-residents. So I don't know the details behind that, but if there are any complaints about that, that would need to be taken up through the council's Have Your Say scheme. Fees like that will have gone through the council, I suspect, in terms of what we charge for those types of services. So that would need to be raised through the council's Have Your Say scheme.
Right, we've got a few more in the chat box. Do you have to give tenants a copy of the electrical test certificate, even in HMO, every time of a new tenancy? So I just want to, do you have to give tenants a copy of the electrical test certificate every time there's a new tenancy? Also, do you have to retest every time you change a tenant? So if you do a test today and it lasts for 5 years and then your tenant leaves after 1 year, can you then wait for 4 years before you have to retest, or do you do it with each new tenant?
Yeah, it is a license condition. Actually, I'll double check that one, because it may be just for gas that is the.
You're talking about the electrical installation,
the EI.
because that's different to PAT testing.
Yeah, well, this is saying electrical test. It's not saying EICR, so I assume it's. John, can you just make it clear what you're referring to, please? If you just type it into the chat box, or if you just unmute yourself.
The test, the electrical installation test.
That's the EICR, I think, isn't it?
The new one that's just come out.
Installation certificate. Yeah, that's every 5 years. I don't believe it's a change of tenancy. Is it, Aaron?
Yeah, no, it is. It is once every 5 years.
Yeah.
As from the 1st of July, the new legislation came in and applies to all tenancies as from the 1st of June. But it's all 5. There'll always be 5 years unless it's otherwise stated on the certificate by the qualified electrician that undertook the works. So in answer to your question, John, no, you don't have to keep having them done every time a tenant is replaced within your properties. It just has to be
Yeah.
done once every 5 years.
My electrician has been informed by his professional body that it's every time a change of tenancy.
Well, your electrician's wrong.
That's what I've
with
told him.
With all due respect.
Yeah.
Can I just say that this actually came up on one of our webinars? You have to see what the electrician has put on the report, because some are saying you have to do a new test every time you change a tenant. And that's obviously they're going to be making more money because you're going to be doing it more often.
Yeah.
So you need to check with your electrician. It should be once every 5 years, not the change of a tenant. Yeah. Right, we're experiencing issues where on HMO renewals, new hazards are being flagged up when they were not an issue when the council did their initial inspection 5 years before and issued the license without any problem.
Yeah, it's obviously hazards should be ideally identified earlier than that. So I do apologize that they should have been flagged earlier.
I would also say that 5 years is quite a long time for somebody to live in a house, and obviously properties do deteriorate. So that's, you know, with the new regulation around fitness for human habitation, landlords do have a duty to make sure that their property is fit in theory, or the whole length of any tenancy. So I think it's not just the officers expected to identify the hazards within a property. It should be up to landlords, particularly now that there is a regulation around this, to ensure that the property is safe at the time. So I think it's a bit, it's frustrating sometimes when, well, that wasn't identified last time. I think that the legislation is changing constantly, and more, as landlords will probably recognise, it's being pushed to landlords to identify, well, just to ensure that the property is safe for the tenants. And I don't think we as officers, we don't always get it right, but also properties do deteriorate, and it's really important that landlords recognise that, you know, property 5 years ago is not the same property 5 years later.
I think that particular question, David, was it's going back to the Parr case again. It was a student HMO, and it related to a staircase, I believe. And then it's been a student HMO for many years, and all of a sudden, on a renewal, and I think that this particular property's had many renewals. Suddenly, the staircase became an issue for the council, and I think it just relates back to the Parr case in terms of bedroom sizes. Flexibility needs to be given for a particular style of tenant, and that one solution doesn't fit all. I think it was just more looking at that particular approach from the council for good landlords, because obviously we do at MPO represent a whole bunch of good landlords, and we want to work and be recognised as good landlords, and flexibility and common sense to apply where it can, essentially. You know, I'm not saying that in an unsort of welcome or a way to be sort of, you know, awkward. It's just, you know, we really want some sort of consistency.
I think on that case, there was a number of first-year tribunal appeals by my colleagues in the Safer Housing team, where perhaps in the past colleagues may have been reluctant to tackle the issue of dangerous stairs due to it is an expensive hazard to remedy, and that they took those cases and they were successful, and that now going back to these properties, that they know that it is a hazard and that it needs to be addressed. And like I said before, it does encompass the current occupants, potential occupants, and visitors. But again, just that we're always open to a conversation and accept representations against notices under HSSRS.
Aaron, I've got the question for you that I asked David before in terms of the severity of the letters coming out.
Yes.
It was a pin on a bin, which was missing. It's a sore point because it was my husband who got the letter.
Okay.
And it was quite a severe letter, which he wasn't very happy about.
Yeah.
I did take this up with Mr. Hobbs this morning, having had a conversation with him, because I was very irritated when I saw the photo of that bin. And again, you know, I don't want to sound awkward, but, you know, we need to work with you guys, and you know, it's a difficult enough landscape as it is, with COVID-19 and everything else going on. But if we've got inspectors going around doing external inspections of properties and highlighting a missing pin on a lid of a bin, it just seems absolutely ridiculous that an unpleasant letter is sent to the landlord requesting action within 48 hours to replace the pin. You know, it just beggars belief, really.
Yes, I do apologize in that particular circumstance that the letter wasn't appropriate. When we received the report, it was that the lid was broken, and on more closer inspection, it was just missing a pin. The letter that was sent, the colleague did make an error in it that it wasn't a breach of the HMO management regulations, that it more related to a license condition. And even at that, the license condition is that it's, I think it's in good repair and that it has a lid. And we're all in agreement that it's, when bins don't have lids, that they get contaminated by people passing by, they get filled with water, the recyclables get wet, it's rejected, and it's not good for anyone. The tone of the letter, absolutely, it's a bit much. It was primarily focused on when we get reports of mini landfills outside properties, and that's why we needed the 48 hours, that it wasn't really acceptable for certain landlords to say, it'll be picked up next week. That's not good for anyone. So I fully recognize that. And like the ASB letters that we rewrote recently, and we received positive feedback that, you know, they weren't threatening, there was no quotation of the initial license conditions or the repercussions. And again, it's on the top of my to-do list to revise our outdoor issues letter so that it is a lot more balanced and fair, and also reflects that it may not be as reported, and that giving it over to our good landlords to have a check on and just feedback to us what their findings were, and that everything's in order. So again, I do apologize that it was definitely.
We'll pass that back. And I think, you know, while we're talking about letters, and again, something I'm quite passionate about, and again, I want to say this in a way that isn't meant as being negative, but I'm quite a direct person. There was an incident, and there are many actually, where, particularly within the student HMO landscape, where students, and obviously this is going to increase because students are going to be spending more time at home, where issues occur around antisocial behaviour, and some of the sort of instances where students having a barbecue in their back garden at 3 o'clock in the afternoon has essentially resulted in a Facebook exchange that I saw with 78 comments, and the 78 comments were very vicious, very hostile from residents towards the students and their landlords. And a sort of complaint was made because residents didn't appreciate the fact that these students were having a barbecue at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But I think if we look at the overall picture, we need to start getting some more consistency around this, because I think expectations need to be set, particularly within the neighbourhoods where there's large numbers of students. I know the universities are taking actions now to try to speak to students about behaviour, but I have to say I was very dismayed and actually alarmed by the level and the hostility of some of these posts on Facebook. I was just over a barbecue. I mean, some of the things being said were just absolutely ghastly. And I think that, you know, the council needs to take ownership of this and set expectations. But maybe something for a future meeting.
It is quite challenging. I mean, because the legislation sets a really, really low bar, in that if the conduct causes annoyance, and you know, if someone's annoyed, then in the eyes of the law, it's antisocial, and it's very subjective. You know, if I fall over and hit my arm, and I'm saying, this pain is 8 out of 10, no one else can say, no, it's not, or I don't believe you, or, you know, because it's in the eye of the beholder, really, at ASB. But what is in our control is the approach that we take, and what we've implemented now in the new ASB is that we do a little bit of fact finding. So we will contact the complainant where possible and just ask them some more questions and find out, is this actually yes, it may be antisocial behavior officially to the complainant, but to us, whether it's appropriate or reasonable for us to reach out to the landlord. So we're definitely added that check now, because I absolutely agree. There are circumstances where we do get people very sensitive to what is perfectly reasonable behavior. Having a barbecue in the sunshine with your friends is, something that we all enjoy doing, and they should be a little bit more accommodating for that, whether it's a family or some students are here studying. So that's definitely something that we consider. We have had complaints where there was one property where I think there was around 13 complaints, and we looked into that all, and it was just unfounded, and the landlord wasn't contacted, and the license was granted as normal. So it's definitely something that we consider and we recognize is an issue.
Thank you, Aaron.
We've got one last question, and then I think it's just going, well, it's just past 1 o'clock. Right, so this one is to do with Dash. I already have a selective license. I'm in the process of Dash accreditation. If I'm accredited, will the council allow me to avail Dash discount retrospectively?
No, I've just responded to that directly, but it's not retrospective, unfortunately. No.
David has put quite a lot in the chat box. If lots of the links appear now, so if you click on those, you'll be able to pick up the information that I think David said that he would provide. This is being recorded, so Giles will be emailing it out. If you've got any other questions, if you let us know, then we'll put them to Aaron and David and then get the answers back to you. And I think that's it.
I think it is. Thank you, Adela. And I'd just like to a special thank you to both David and Aaron for coming along and participating in this webinar. I'm sure we've all taken away some important advice and knowledge from it, and we continue to work with you guys, and obviously the agenda is all about working together, and hopefully we will have a similar update in 3 or 4 months' time, either through this medium or hopefully in a sort of conference room somewhere. And that's all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.